Welcome to the Small Town Podcast. My name is Sarah Roach Lewis, and I'm really pleased to have Catherine Nazem here today with me. And we're going to have a great chat about sponsorship. But before that, I just want to let you know that Catherine is an Islander who spent the last 10 years studying and traveling. She holds a master's degree in English literature and creative writing from Concordia University in Montreal. She recently made a career change and now works in community outreach, sponsorship acquisition, and event coordination for La Fédération Culturelle of Prince Edward Island. My French is terrible.
That's okay.
And Art in the Open. So welcome. I'm really excited to talk to you. And tell me a little bit about, what your path to being this sponsorship coordinator has been.
Sure. Well, as you read, I started in English literature and creative writing at Concordia. And while I was doing my master's, I was really lucky to be able to do a lot of events. And so that's sort of how I got into it. I would coordinate academic conferences or creative writing nights or that kind of stuff, stuff that benefited me and my classmates a lot. So stuff that was really fun. And I think that's kind of what made me fall in love with event coordination, is that ultimately I'm creating the kind of scene I want to be a part of. And that's kind of been my mantra for this past year is whatever work I do, I want to turn my home into the kind of place I really want to live. So really, like, if I could have my dream location, it would have the cultural sort of vibe and offering that Montreal has, but in PEI, because I'm from here, and I love this place, and my family's from here. And I'm coming back to it after about 10 years away. So it's, I thought I was going to be an English teacher, and then I decided not to do that after having a little bit of experience in there. And I just sort of lucked out, and I got a position with Art in the Open last summer. And I'd never done sponsorship before. It was a little bit scary. But the Art in the Open team is amazing, and I was also really fortunate to have dual mentorship from Becca Vio and Mark Sandiford of Creative PEI.
So I think your experience is really not that uncommon when you say, you're a little bit afraid to do sponsorship at the front end. Tell me a little bit about what that experience was and what are some of those lessons that you've learned that you can share with other people about how to become more confident asking people for money in a sponsorship capacity.
Well, I think what it comes down to is if the thing that you're selling or offering is something you love and you're passionate about, that really helps. So, my experience is pretty limited, but one of the reasons I jumped at the chance of doing something I'd never done before was because Art in the Open is my favorite night of the year. I used to schedule my visits home around when it was, because it was always the end of summer, so it's a lovely time to come, and it kind of did that thing of, this was the PEI I wanted to live in. It felt kind of cool and a little bit grown up. And I don't know, when you're a teenager in PEI,
sure,
it feels like there's not a lot of cool, innovative stuff going on. And suddenly, because I've been away from from PEI for about 10 years, and so coming back here to make my home, I was kind of like, is this the right decision? Is this the right place? But PEI also has something that's kind of magical. It feels like the island is this extended family. There's this connectedness and a kind of real, genuine, selfless desire to support and get involved and get things off the ground. People show up to benefits. People show up to arts events. We have a good scene, as small as it is. And so it was that kind of, I guess what I discovered this summer is there was this sort of magical combination of the fact that I was working for this project that I completely 110% believed in and loved and was so pumped to get to do. And also in this place that I knew really well. I'd grown up here. I don't have any family here. I'm first-generation Islander and first-generation Canadian. My mom's from New York and my dad's from Ireland. But I had a kind of chosen family here. Mm-hmm. My neighbors that I grew up around and the kids I played with, those became sort of my cousins, my aunts and uncles. And so I still felt that connectedness, which I really value. And so what I found, I guess, that was the most surprising were how many people, how many businesses, real legit businesses, wanted to be involved just out of love for the festival. They weren't doing this because they knew that they'd be getting a huge financial return or I mean, we do give a lot of exposure. We have a very active couple of social media pages, Facebook and Instagram, and our website gets a lot of traffic. But compared to really big festivals, in Toronto and California and wherever, we're not creating them a massive amount of money.
Sure.
But there's a lot of social capital in PEI. There's a lot of, a lot of love for the people, a lot of community support and engagement, and sort of time after time with these well-established businesses as well as new ones that are kind of new to downtown. Everybody was just keen to be involved because it was a great festival, and it had proven itself where, last year was its 8th year. And I don't know, it filled me with a lot of hope, which sounds really cheesy. But I just don't know if I would have, I've never tried to do sponsorship in bigger cities like Toronto or Montreal or Vancouver, but I have a feeling that unless I had lived there for a really long time, I wouldn't really experience this kind of willingness to jump on board, I guess.
Sure, fair enough. So from a practical perspective, if we're looking at something like sponsorship or, what were some of those things that you needed to provide to sponsors, or what were some of the stories you needed to tell yourself in order to acquire that sponsorship that you really needed to run the event?
Well, I think sponsorship's changed a lot. It used to be all about logos. The sponsor's logo is on everything: posters, merch, tickets, whatever. And that was great. But that was also sort of a pre-internet kind of days thing. Now you get so much more, obviously, from Instagram or Facebook, and those platforms can also give you the analytics to show you the exact breakdown of how many people showed up that were male, female. Did we reach the LGBTQ community? Did we reach an accessibility community? Did we, and that's very helpful and stuff like that. But I think it's shifted to the point where I found that a lot of sponsors wanted to be involved in some way, whether that's contribute volunteers or contribute space or contribute, man the volunteer booth, kind of stuff like that. And that's definitely giving them great exposure. They're showing a really strong connection between the arts event and their business. But it also was kind of, again, sort of speaking to this idea that there is just this quality of being game to be involved and not just be at arm's length and be like, okay, here's $200, go away, kind of thing. So I guess I would suggest to people who are kind of starting out as I did to explore that capacity. See if you're, I found the most success when I just sat down and had a coffee with a potential sponsor. And so I would email them saying, or call them up and say, listen, I'd love to just chat. No pressure. If it turns out that it's not in the cards this year, that's fine. But I'd love just to talk possibilities first before numbers and money and stuff like that. That stuff comes later. It's more, do they know about the festival? If not, how can we, get them involved so that they really get to experience the magic that I love and I know exists. And then beyond that, just find ways, even if you're a small kind of event like we are, find ways of getting them some good exposure. So make sure that you do lots of social media shout-outs. If you've got any articles in The Buzz or in The Guardian or in The Graphic, mention them, acknowledge that they're really crucial and a big part of the festival, and kind of think of them beyond dollar signs. Especially here on PEI. Sometimes these are either new businesses trying to establish themselves, and so having a presence would really give them a kind of lift off the ground and a presence in the community. Or sometimes, for example, Kent is our longest running sponsor. They've been sponsoring us since 2011. They give us lumber and supplies and a little bit of money, and they also provide us with a tent as for one of our volunteer booths on site. And they're so happy just to be asked to be involved and not just, the relationship, I guess, doesn't end once the paycheck is handed over, is sort of the best way I can put it. And that's a really good factor to consider when you're looking for long-term sponsors as well. That's my kind of goal, especially going into my second year with Art in the Open, is longevity. So I would rather a sponsor give what they know they can manage to give us over, say, like 3 years, rather than give us a huge chunk at the beginning and then not be able to follow that up. I'd rather that they feel comfortable and satisfied as much as we are with the relationship. So that's a kind of roundabout answer. But ultimately kind of trying to find a connection there first, create a relationship.
I think, and that's really what I was thinking about, is how important that relationship is.
Oh, it's the most important.
And I think also, I think it's interesting part of what I'm hearing you say is to not go in with any preconceived notions.
Absolutely. I think that's like, for a number of reasons. And I think something that made my job a little bit difficult at the beginning was I was given this figure, this amount that my board had asked me to raise. And it felt huge, even though comparatively to especially a lot of bigger events, that would be a drop in the bucket for what they need. So that's the other thing, is that I'm not asking sponsors for massive amounts of money. Like, these aren't big donations. It's big to us because any amount of money is massive and exciting and means that we can do more. And usually that money goes towards paying artist fees, which is what we really love, is that ultimately what this festival is kind of doing is giving exposure to both local and international artists. And we have an artist in residency program, so that pairs specifically a PEI artist with a professional visiting artist for a week, and the local artist helps the visiting artist finish their project, which then is shown at Art in the Open. So it's we're creating a lot of opportunities, but I think going in without any kind of hard line of what you need. Like, if I'd gone in and said, okay, I have to raise like 10 grand by the end of the summer, it kind of puts blinders on you. You don't end up seeing. You're doing all of that for the wrong reasons. You're only seeing the monetary need, and you're not seeing the bigger picture of how can I make this festival the absolute best it can be. And so what I think what's shifted between last summer and this summer is I no longer see, cold hard cash as the ultimate be-all and end-all goal. For us, our two biggest needs are volunteers and storage space. And space in general. Like 2 years ago, we were fortunate enough to have been given 2 spots on University Avenue. One that ended up hosting an art installation on the festival day itself, and then the other one was our headquarters, which meant that we had a space for volunteers to congregate and kind of get to know what they'd be doing, and that was so valuable. But it's something that we probably wouldn't put money aside in our budget for because it's not absolutely necessary. But because we were given that space as a donation of in-kind sponsorship, it completely changed how we ran the festival. So what I've kind of approached this summer doing is looking at, okay, what's the full scope of what we need? It's not just money. We need at least about 120 volunteers because we have 2-hour time slots per volunteer. We've got a lot of stuff to do because we set up for the full day. The festival starts at 4. We start at 6:37 a.m., setting up, helping artists, coordinating, all this kind of stuff. And it takes a lot of bodies. And so what I will be doing this year is asking the sponsors that we have that have really big staff, like Kent or any of those kind of larger entities, rather than focusing on a monetary donation, I'll be asking if they would provide staff for the day, so they would pay their staff to be there with us all day. So the people aren't losing out. They're not spending their Saturday working, basically. They're being paid to do it, but they're also getting to have this really cool opportunity to see how a festival works, to meet visiting artists, so it kind of ends up being a nice thing for them to do as well. And if I can find all 120 volunteers before we get the rest of our staff for the festival, because this is also the first year we've ever had someone working full year on Art in the Open. It's a free festival. We don't have any kind of money for salaries. But I'm now working for the Fédération Culturelle, and they project managed Art in the Open last year, and so that was a kind of easy sort of transition for me. And if I can find all of the volunteers before we get the rest of the staff, then that staff is being used to coordinate those volunteers, which is much more useful way for them to spend their time rather than going out and looking for volunteers starting in, April, May, or whenever our staff kind of comes together. And that way, our team just runs better. If I've done my job really well and really effectively and kind of thought about the bigger picture and included all of the things that we need, and rather than just money, first of all, we end up needing less money kind of in the end because all these other things are sort of taken care of. So that's really my goal going into the summer, is kind of expand my perspective of what sponsorship means, what it can do, how it can change the festival for the better, and ultimately, obviously, we do need money to do certain things, but if all of those needs are met first, then that kind of narrows the amount of money that we need and the amount of kind of other things that are required. So that was a really fun lesson, was kind of learning, it's not all about just give us cash. It's A, how can we get you involved? And B, what can you give us that we need that we didn't really realize we needed, that could actually really, change how we do things for the better. So,
and really neat. I love that idea too of leveraging what your sponsors may have and not even really think about.
Yeah, absolutely.
And something like an empty space on University Avenue, how much that can transform the event.
Or perfect example, United Rentals. They do like those big sort of digital construction signs or road signs.
Oh yes, yes.
Big caution, multi-lights and stuff like that. I approached them, and they can't give cash at all. It's just part of their mandate. It's I could go into it, but it's not terribly interesting. But what came out of it was that they asked. We had an artist who was doing a project that needed that kind of sign exactly, but it would have been $700 or $800 to rent for the weekend, and so I approached them, and it was a shot in the dark. I did not think that they would go for it. I was just like, hey guys, any chance you would want to give us this massive sign for 2 days for free? And they said yes. Because for them, that's great exposure. They were in Rochford Square. The art piece was, and Josh, I'm so sorry, I'm going to explain this so terribly. But I think it was a conversation back and forth between partners. And so over the course of the 8 hours of the festival, if you sat and watched only that, you would see the full conversation unfold. But otherwise, you would just walk past it and see these snippets of this moment in someone's life. And United Rentals, had probably 8,000 or 9,000 people walk past that sign over the course of the full festival, and it has their logo on it, and it's that's pretty incredible exposure. And they'd never done anything like that before. They'd never been involved with Art in the Open or I think any kind of arts festival. And when I went back in the fall to do kind of my check-in that I like to do afterwards, which is another thing that I want to come back to, is sort of the stewardship and the following up in sponsorship relationships. They were just so pleased to have been involved, and it was I think $700, and that's something that the artist couldn't afford, and something that would have had to go into our budget, and also could have potentially affected whether or not we chose that piece if it was not feasible, But instead, I got to facilitate this art piece being included, and also this great company that was totally game to be involved, give them some great exposure and acknowledgement. And they said, listen, if it's unlikely you'll ever need to use this again, but if you want to, we'd be thrilled. And that was just that made me so happy, because there were so many positive outcomes, and not just for us. It was great for them, and that means that that's a potential long-term relationship. We could find a way to integrate them every year. I don't know. It was so, again, it gave me a little bit of hope.
So lots of places that I want to go, but I want to actually follow the thread that you started. Tell me a little bit about the importance of follow-up, and what does that look like?
Well, I kind of equate it to following up after a job interview. It just puts you that head and shoulders above anyone else who didn't do that. It's just that showing of appreciation and acknowledgement of time and of contribution, and and honestly, I've had some of my best sponsor interactions during those conversations, because I started in April last year, which is, by the way, the worst time to try and start sponsorship relationships, because everyone is, in summer mode already, especially artisans. Nobody has any money because they've already allocated everything in their budgets, which often usually happens either in the fall or in the new year.
Sure.
Something I didn't know until I went through this whole thing. And I don't know. Everyone was so much more relaxed. It was such a lovely time to chat, and we made plans for the future. I developed, again, I'm working full year, just because we've been lucky to have those circumstances, and this is such a better time to plan for the next year, to build your relationship, to get to know them. Because that's the other thing, is I didn't really explore what those sponsors could potentially contribute other than cash, because I was running around trying to get as much done as possible in the summer months. But now I've been able to sit down with people, have a coffee, talk to them about what they would love to see, in terms of our relationship, what would make it worth it for them to be involved long term, and just have the conversation, get to know them, get to figure out if there's a better direction to take the relationship.
Sure.
Also to figure out what you did wrong. Stuff happens, things, bottom out at the last minute, and sometimes it's not our fault. It's something that the sponsor was going to provide, and then they weren't able to, and as a result, they didn't get the exposure that they wanted. Sure, we could say, not our problem, hands off, but that doesn't help the relationship, and also you don't want that to be the lingering feeling, because they might not really equate the fact that it was, their job to contribute this thing. It might just be like, well, they didn't really try hard enough to make it any better in the moment. So I think that right after the festival, give yourself some breathing room. We all took a week off after the event and just kind of recuperated, because you're moving with such momentum that you do have to kind of stop and be like, okay, I have to get back to real life eventually. Mm-hmm. But then, for us, Art in the Open is always the last Saturday of August. And so a week and a half later is an ideal time just to send out a message saying, hey, I know September is still a busy time, but please let me know when you'd be available to meet. I'd love to just grab a coffee and kind of debrief. And that's all that you have to do kind of for that correspondence. And if they're game for it, use that time to be like, what did we do well? What could we do better? What would it take for you to be involved long term? What do you want ultimately? What are your dreams? Because at that point, anything is possible, because you don't have your budget for the next year, but you also can come to the table when you're building that budget and say, hey, I've got this person who's got this really cool idea, but we'd have to start working on it now, and we'd have to be sure we have the funds for it. But it's feasible then. That's the thing, and so I think that, and also you can do that sort of thing. All of our staff kind of finished around that time. But if you still want to have people's opinions before everyone sort of scatters to the four winds and moves on to the next project, you got to catch it sort of before you lose that headspace and that momentum. If it's just you, then that's a different kind of question. But if you're working with a team, that's another kind of thing that's good to do at that time, is just talk to your team and just be like, hey, what did I do well with sponsorship? What would was there anyone that was a pain in the ass for you on your end that I didn't see?
Right.
Kind of tie up all your loose ends, get everything ready for the next year, make sure all of your relationships are kind of in a good place, and then come back to them in January, February, March at the latest. I've found, it's been really nice talking to people for the last couple of months and just be like, and it can be super casual. That's the other thing, is that there's no rush right now. It's all kind of possibilities and leisurely chats. But without fail, every single person I've done this with has just been like, man, it's so nice to talk to you now when we're building our budget, and also when things aren't so crazy, because it's such a seasonal place, BEI, that you have to really start things as sort of season ahead. Mm-hmm. So if your event's in the spring, you have to start stuff 3 or 4 months ahead of that if you're asking for sponsorship. Because that's the other thing, is that budgets work differently. I found that some places have a month-to-month kind of allocation for sponsorship. So a place like Sobeys, they kind of have a certain amount that they allocate every month, and if that's spent, then they ask you to come back next month. So it's worth it to come to them a couple months ahead of time in case there's a bit of a backlog. But also just as a courtesy. It's not a great thing to come to people 3 weeks before your event. So, it depends. Some people prefer that because they're just like, it's too far in the future. But again, this is where you figure out all this stuff over coffee. You just kind of, if they would rather just be known or be told 3 or 4 weeks out, that's great. Put it in your spreadsheet. That's the other thing. I have a massive spreadsheet of all of our sponsors and all of the sort of little quirks that is with every relationship.
I was going to ask about that, and I'm really happy to hear that, because I think, there is, when things are so relationship based, part of the challenge of an organization is if there's any sort of transition in the HR.
Absolutely.
Then it becomes so looking at what are some of those structural or practical things that we can do to ensure that. So really, you've just got a massive spreadsheet that you track your sponsors and potential sponsors.
Well, and in general, I love the way that Art in the Open is run. Becca is an absolute genius, and so is Ghislaine Cormier at the Fédération, and we have an excellent board. But those two in particular, like that we have and we have a whole team, and everyone's kind of doing different things, but we have a document that lists every single job that needs to be done, organized by date and person doing it. And so that means that we can work quite autonomously, which I love. I love that combination of working with the team, but also having space and autonomy to do what I'm doing. There's always that support system. I never ever felt like I was alone. I could always reach out if I was floundering or having a hard time. And we would meet regularly enough that we all knew what everybody was doing. And it just, I don't know, it's probably maybe the best experience of teamwork I've ever experienced. And you find that a lot in the not-for-profit kind of circuit, and especially in the arts sphere. Again, because everybody loves the product that they're working on. So we all are doing it for this great reason. So that was kind of how I learned to do this, was just, if I can't do it next year, or if I get a different job, or if I move, or if I get sick, I would like to be able to have all the information there for someone else to just pick up and, have a look at and be able to glean where they need to go to next. So,
or let me just interrupt.
Yeah.
Or for yourself. I will tell you, the older you get.
Absolutely. Hey, man, I'm about to turn 33, and my brain is an untrustworthy place sometimes. Yeah. But I find organization is your friend with stuff like this. So I have a sponsorship spreadsheet. So I just have all of the different sponsors, the type of business they are, whether they're another not-for-profit or arts organization, or more of a corporate entity, or an artist themselves. We've had donations of like $50 to $200 just from artists in town who are just like, I can't give you very much, but I want to keep this going. And so I'm a writer originally. My degree is in creative writing, and I also take a lot of solace in writing and in organization. I hate when things are kind of out in the ether and not, or all in my head. I'm an obsessive note taker, and so I just, with every line of sponsor, I look at, who they are, what they've given us, what they did for us in the previous year, what they're interested in doing next year, when was the last time I connected with them, and their contact details. So that way, and it's all on Google Drive. So it's just super easy. There's nothing on paper. There's nothing in file folders. There's nothing that's on my personal computer that's not up there. And all of the logos and all that stuff. And so that way also, you're not doing as much from scratch the next year. You know exactly who you worked with, what they gave, what they expected of it. And that also makes it easier when we're making like our program booklet or building, the sponsor page on the website. It's a little bit of planning in the moment helps so much in the future. And it was just a very kind of, I always knew where I stood. I always knew where I was going. And so when we did have those meetings with the full team, I could say, hey, here's what I'm working on. Here's where we stand. And you can see all of that, in the Google folder as much as possible. And just refine it as you go, basically. I don't know. And just knowing that nobody's falling through the cracks. Because that's the worst thing you can do, is let down your sponsor in terms of not following through. If they've held up their end of the bargain and you promise them X, Y, and Z, do your absolute best to deliver X, Y, and Z. And if you can't, be in touch with them. I'm a pretty anxious person, and I, like many of people in my generation, hate talking on the phone, mostly because I hate hearing my own voice. So this is a very interesting experience to do right now. But don't let things slide. I avoid things when I'm anxious about them, and it's the worst thing you can do, because then it's just like, dude, just let me know what's going on. That's all, And usually people are very forgiving and very understanding, especially, again, in PEI. I've just been met with nothing but kindness and enthusiasm and love for the event that I'm working on.
Well, you certainly are working on an event that has a lot of goodwill in this community. And I appreciate so much of our conversation, because we've really focused on sponsorship, and you've really given us some amazing insight into how to run a really solid festival, like an amazing event that is successful and grows and builds and is sustainable every year. Yeah. So I appreciate that kind of peek behind the curtain in terms of what it looks like to be part of that kind of team. So I do, Catherine, just want to give you that opportunity if there's any sort of final advice or thoughts that you wanted to bring to this idea around sponsorship.
I guess also just, it always helps to kind of just switch it and put yourself in their shoes and just think, if I were, especially if it's a larger donation, like we've gotten a few kind of very, unexpectedly generous donations that we didn't necessarily ask for that much, but, it was kind of offered. And in situations like that, the kind of gold, silver, bronze approach is very antiquated when it comes to sponsorship. That's used to be how it was, like for, a donation between X amount and X amount, you get this, this, and this, and then it kind of diminishes as you go lower. But every sponsor relationship is different, and you kind of just think about, like, okay, well, what would I want if I were them? And then that kind of gets confirmed or denied in the conversation you have with them. But just, I don't know, I've been trying to... I don't know anything about business. I really don't, but I've learned a lot about how business relationships can work. Obviously this sort of approach doesn't work for everybody, and for some people, they really do want to know how many views will our shout-outs get, how much exposure are we getting through this, do we have any signage on the ground itself, blah, blah, blah. And Art in the Open was a very different event. We purposefully don't have any on-site signage other than at our volunteer booths, and that's so that anyone can wander up and see an art piece, and there's no velvet rope, there's no sign saying this is art, acknowledge it, kind of thing. The whole point of the festival is to turn downtown Charlottetown into an open-air art gallery that is free, it's accessible to everyone. All of the signage and stuff that does exist is in both languages, basically trying to make art as accessible to everybody as possible, and to reach those people for whom they've kind of decided that art isn't for them, they just don't get it, and as a result they won't take that step and go to the gallery or go see this thing. But if we just put it in our downtown kind of quarter and make it free and just invite people to kind of come and go as you please, it creates a really magical, special kind of feeling. And I had to really shift the way I thought about sponsorship and make it appropriate to that. So I guess that's the thing that I would want to end on is have a good think about whether it's an event or a product or whatever it is that you're selling, so to speak, as a sponsorship coordinator. And think about what is appropriate for your event, because everything is different. If I tried to find sponsorship the way that I would for a concert that was being performed at the Molson Centre in Toronto or, something, it would just be completely different. There would be ticket sales, so there would be benefits with that, and it's just a whole different sort of thing. So I really had to look at what I was doing with this festival and figure out what worked for that, and kind of ignore everything else and sort of find my way that way. And I think ultimately that meant that I guess, fairly successful in what I've been doing. I've been allowed to continue doing it, so I'm going to take that to mean that I'm doing okay. And yeah, just kind of build what you do around the thing that you're doing it for.
Well, Catherine, thank you so much. This has been a fantastic conversation.
You're so welcome.
Really
thank you so much for
enjoyed
having
it.
me. It's been great.
Great, thank you.
Cheers.